So welcome again. Now we're at number 6 in the series entitled Freedom, Freedom. And we have several times paused to remind ourselves what we are trying to do during these reflections. We're looking at something that is very well known, probably from a different perspective, so that we notice the details that in our highly pressurized and very busy lives we miss, the essential details. The themes have been demanding, and this one today is perhaps the most demanding of all of them. We're going to look at the structure of society, as it was, as it still is, and as it is changing rapidly. And it's difficult to get a new vision, to revision a structure that has always existed and which is therefore soaked deeply into our human consciousness. So we have to bring it very simply to the forefront of our minds again. The structure by which humanity has worked socially from the beginning in our tribal past until modern times was basically that of a pyramid. A boss at the top, the authority and the power to make decisions for society, delegated slowly, bit by bit, down to the grassroots. We are so used to this as the basic structure by which human society works that it's amazing that we have to now face the fact that it is not working. That after centuries and thousands of years of taking it for granted that this is how we work, we face that we are not working adequately. And it is changing. It's also important to remember that the pyramid, when it collapses, doesn't collapse from the top, it collapses from the bottom. This way. Keep this very simple, symbolic image in front of you. So, in a hierarchical, structured society, worldwide, over tens of thousands of years, the authority has always been invested in a single person. The authority, the power to make decisions, to control society. That power was delegated, as I said. It was not resigned or given away to others. It remained with the boss at the top, but the authority was shared, and the responsibility was shared to a certain extent, but the final authority could still withdraw this. It was never handed over. Now, I don't need to point out the many examples we have in the political systems in which we live today, where this is absolutely obvious and paramount in the way that it is working. How did this structure begin? Well, usually with a fight. People fought to be the boss at the top. They either fought with sticks and stones and bows and arrows or guns or ballot papers. You fight an election, still. But whichever way you do it, there was always a fight, a struggle between rivals, between opponents. Sometimes they had coalitions, we've still got them. But still the authority is vested and the power is vested in the pyramidal structure. Okay? Once the pyramid was set up, the structure was set up, the hierarchy. How did it proceed? Well, it was fought for, and then it was either inherited. We had, through families, we had kingdoms and empires all over the planet, in every culture. Or it was gained through work, particularly in the professional fields, where you were successful in your work, and so everybody gained from it, so you went up the promotion ladder, the next step, towards the top. We're all very familiar with that. Or you have a very attractive persona. People liked you. You were popular. You were the one who could make the fun. You were the one that can say, it's all right, we'll be okay, and so on. But we know these systems. They're so soaked into our consciousness that it might seem a waste of time to pull it all out and spread it on the table and look at it. But we need to. This is the way our human family has been structured, as I said, from tribal times until now. But it has already begun to collapse, and seriously to collapse, worldwide. And one of the major ways that we've all become conscious of this is in the political field, where we're witnessing mass protests, political protests, around the world, in every country, no matter which political party is in power, what political views they're holding, somehow or other, in a very short space of time, there will be protests, political protests. And when we say mass protests, I'm thinking of one that's only recent, where 300,000 people gathered to shout against the one who was the boss at the top at this time. Shouting in protests, enormous crowds. Where are we getting with all this? The collapse from the bottom, not from the top, is happening. We see it in the political protests, we see it in the political structures, but it's in everything. Those of us who still have any religious affiliation to any of the world religions will be witnessing this equally within our particular religious tradition. Because they are all structured, whether you have at the top, you have an imam, a guru, a pope, or whatever. They are hierarchically structured. This is the way it was taken for granted. Human society has to function. Now, when we breathe deeply and look at this again, we realize just how serious, how far-reaching the effects are of this collapse now. Perhaps the simplest way for us to do it, and the most useful, is to look at our own experience of the experience of hierarchy. Did you have hierarchy in your family? Was grandfather the one who dictated everything? Or not? Or in school? How did that work? Your experience of being a school child? Or a student? Or in your profession? How does it work in your profession? Or did it work? And what, on the whole, have been your emotional responses to it? Positive or negative? Have you found yourself supporting it when you were on the way up in promotion, or fighting it when you couldn't get out of the grassroots and wanted to be more important in the system? Okay. So we need to look at this very familiar, more than familiar, it just seems to be an unquestioned acceptance that human society has to work as a hierarchy, as a pyramid, with delegated authority coming down and going up again. Of course, with the authority should have gone the responsibility. And that we're also seeing now much more clearly. When we look at the wide variety of mass protests and protest movements we have, whether we are people in the street, as I mentioned, or all wearing coloured jackets, or women making a protest against sexual abuse on the media and so on, whatever means are being used, if you look around, the protest against the structure is well underway, and the structure has already begun to collapse over the last half century. What we're discovering about this is that there is often, with mass protest against a structure, a lack of clear leadership. Everybody can protest about what has been or what still is, but you need the leadership to be able to say, that is where we should be going. And that is what we need to make happen. The strength of crowd courage is really very weak. It disappears, you know. You have water cannons fired by the police, and something more interesting happens. And the crowd loses its courage because it never really had any leadership. But it doesn't want the hierarchical leadership any longer. That's what it's protesting about. But the crowd courage not only evaporates quickly because it is weak, because nobody takes the full responsibility for what is happening. Mass protests have a very weak structure. It is less effective than the boss at the top, the hierarchy, the pyramid. So, what is going to replace it? What has already begun? What has already begun? It seems to have begun mostly in commerce first, but we need a little more time to get all the facts and figures in place. But we are aware now that we have two other ways of structuring humanity and human interaction. One of them is networking, and the other is round tables. And we all know what a net is and how you have different knots in the net and outreach from one important one to another. And if all the hubs are tight and all the nets are, all the outreaches are connected, the net is strong. The strength is in everybody having responsibility, taking their share of the responsibility, and passing on the information, the expertise, the skills. Networking. No one boss at the top. Another one is the round tables. In the English literature, you have the famous stories of the Middle Ages with King Arthur and his knights formed a round table. Not mythology now, it's fact. Can human beings get out of the structure of thinking we must be a pyramid and thinking of ourselves as sitting round a round table, where no one position is more important than any other, where everybody shares equal responsibility for the project that's on the table, but each person comes forward and takes that responsibility according to the skills that he or she has when they are needed. And they're used and supported by the others round the table. And when something else is needed, or somebody else brings something forward, with more skills and more ability or experience, then nobody complains. Everybody supports the new one who is taking temporary leadership of the round table. It looks as though it will work. And in some cases it certainly is working. Do we have an alternative to the pyramid other than this? One has not yet emerged. The nets and round tables are the ones that have already started to emerge. And now more and more organizations which were basically pyramid, hierarchy, are seeing how they can adjust and adapt to round tables. Well, it takes more than a little bit of adjustment round a business meeting, round the board table of the board running a company, for example, or a religious tradition, for example, or a profession, medicine, for example. It takes a little bit more than that. What has to change? The structure of pyramid encouraged rivalry and competition, so that I can get one step higher towards the top than my colleagues, where I have a little bit more of the responsibility and the authority, but the authority is what I want. Can we really change our normal, our usual way of interacting with each other? To respect, to appreciation, to comradeship, rather than rivalry? Who's going to get to the top first? This is the major change that has to come about within our human family, within each human being. The basic challenge. The challenge is to the desire we have to rule, to control, to be the one in charge. That has to be changed to be the one who can lead. Lead. Lead, not rule or control. To be a leader in a round-tabled structure, you need to be a person who has the strength of autonomy. I can walk alone. I am not supported by the crowd. My courage doesn't come from appreciation by the multitude, but from within. By conviction, by faith. That courage can make me a leader in a situation where my particular skills are needed. So what has to change in human beings is that we have to be prepared to walk alone within the crowd. Yeah? To be autonomous, to be independent, to have the strength of our inner reality, the presence of God, the Spirit, and yet to work harmoniously with all those around me, even though, and this is a challenge we've already mentioned, we are so diverse in our skills, in our experiences, and in all our human capacity for emotion and thought and so on. This is the real challenge that has come from the collapse of the hierarchy. And it isn't to any particular group of people, it's to every single human being. The basic challenge: can I convert my desire to rule, to be in authority, to be important, into being an autonomous leader within the multitude, within the group. A new social structure. There are signs that it has certainly already begun, certainly overwhelming experience and evidence that it is needed urgently, and we're not going to be able to build the pyramids again. So we'd better get going on learning how to work with each other, to live with each other, to respect each other, and to allow the best of our giftedness and our experience to be available for all. The leader is not seeking promotion. He's seeking the good of all. So the question is for me, a personal one. What am I going to do in this situation? Just sit back and see the structure collapse around me? Just be part of the crowd that has courage when there are 33,000 in the square and disappears immediately? The crowd disappears, I go too? Or have I heard sufficiently to know that the call is to every single human being to rediscover the strength of who we are individually, the power that is alive in us, which is not of our making, which is gifted, which is the Spirit within us. Am I free enough? Am I really free enough to walk alone and yet work with all those and for all those around me? Enjoy your next month.